Welcome to the Knowledge-Based Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Karissa Van Baulen, Support Specialist at Hotjar. I'm sure many of you already know about this company, Hotjar. It gives the big picture of how to improve a site's user experience and performance or conversion rates. So, welcome, Karissa, to Knowledge Based Ninjas podcast.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, great. So it's really great to have you here. Before we jump on to the questions, please feel free to introduce a bit more about yourself. And I'm really eager to understand the nature of your business because it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, of course. I've been with Hotjar for about 3 years now. And I just got into the documentation manager role for the past 2 years. And you pretty much nailed it with Hotjar when you were explaining it. It's a behavior analytics software, and it makes it easy to go beyond traditional web analytics to really understand what the users are doing on your site. So you get more of an insight rather than just the qualitative numbers. So yeah, I mean, I've been, like I said, here for 3 years now, and the documentation, when I started, didn't really have an owner. And it was one of those situations where I just kind of jumped in, I saw the opening and I was like, let's do it. let's take on this documentation and wrangle it a bit.
Fantastic. Great. So I know you just jumped into this role of documentation manager, but how did you feel about the shift from a support specialist to a documentation manager?
So it was pretty natural, I think. And I find it really interesting when I talk to other people and other documentarians, documentation managers, that a lot of their content will come from support. Especially like when you look at the KCS method, all of the content is coming from support. And so I think it was really important for me to have that experience working face to face with their users so that I knew firsthand what the issues were, where the learning curves were, where we were lacking for explanation. And you see that a lot, especially if you just look at tickets that come in general. So you can see that, last week we had a group of 80 tickets about this particular installation process. So that already is a red flag saying, okay, we need to work on that particular installation content. So I do find it very common, or more and more common, that a lot of the documentation department or team does live within the support department of a lot of startups or tech companies.
Fantastic, great. So, what's your documentation process? How do you manage your documentation, and who do you normally involve along with you in creating such processes?
Mm-hmm. So, our structure kind of relies on the rest of the team structure at Hotjar. So we're built into squads. And each squad is built up of project managers, marketers, developers, and they meet together separately rather than the traditional, all developers meeting together, all product managers meeting together. And they own a certain part of Hotjar. And so what we decided to do was it's me currently, and then we have tribe writers. So they're the ones that we call them tribe writers, but essentially they're assigned per squad, and their sole responsibility is to, attend the meetings, learn what's going on, learn what features, have their input, because all the writers on our team are also support. So they do their support full time, and then during project time, that's when they work on the writing. And so they'll go to these meetings, these Scrum meetings, retros, and they'll learn what features are being built. They'll actually even have their input. So if someone's saying, hey, we need to build this great new feature, they have the voice to say, hey, you know what? No one has requested that, but I have an idea of something that has been requested. And so it really puts the voice of the user, the voice of the customer into those conversations. And so once that conversation is had, they just hit the ground running at that point. So they start kind of planning out, okay, we will need X amount of documents. We'll need, a how-to, we'll need an FAQ, maybe even a guide for the specific setup. And they will be the ones that write it. And they'll come for us for feedback if they need it. The technical review is owned by the team, the squad that it's working on. So one of the developers will look over to make sure that it's all technically sound and it's correct. And from there, they'll send it to another writer, someone different that can look over and make sure, compared to our style guide, make sure that the writing's there, and ultimately just making sure that they can understand how this new feature is going to work. We want to just make sure that the understanding's there from the beginning. And from there, it's published and hopefully well accepted if we planned it out correctly. But we found that recently, since we've moved to that squad structure, it's essential that we're in from the beginning. And I mean, it's a very common theme within tech companies where technical writers are struggling because they're a product member or a developer will come to you and be like, oh, you know what? We're going to release something in 5 minutes, but you don't need documentation. And you're just sitting there like, no, we have to update a bunch of documents right now. So this is a big deal.
Yeah.
There's always that disconnect. So this helps kind of close that disconnect a bit. It's still there. It's not perfect, but it definitely helps close that gap of understanding of we need to know as soon as possible.
Fantastic. It sounds very detailed and structured as well. So how long does it normally take to get your documentation released? Because it looks like you've got a very, very well structured and managed process. So that's why I'm very curious to understand the timelines as well.
It really depends on what we're building. What we have done is we've kind of given an estimate to the team in general, and we say we have a table, a chart on Confluence, and it kind of goes over depending on whether it's high or low priority. If it's a medium, small, or large document, if it's just a typing mistakes, we kind of give an estimate of how long it will take. But typically for feature rollouts, it relies mainly on how long it takes them to build the actual feature. But if it's something where they're saying, okay, if it's a perfect world and they'll be done with the feature as fast as we're writing, I would say maybe about two weeks to make sure that we'll write the first draft. They'll show us the first version 1 of the feature. We'll take a look, make sure that our documentation lines up to it. And then, there's always iterations on version 1 of what the developers are building. So there's going to be iterations of our documentation. But relative, we haven't had any bumps yet where they're waiting for us. We're typically ready to go when they're ready to push that live button. So like I said, if it was a perfect world where our writing was lined up with their production, it would probably be about 2 weeks to write the documentation, get it all set up and published.
Fantastic. Great. So what are the important factors to consider when creating such documentation, especially for a SaaS business like yours?
Know who you're writing for. That's the biggest one for us. So I found that if you pay attention to marketing's personas, I'm sure everyone else's marketing team, they're very, they're doing the research constantly. They're finding different ways to use the tool. That's literally what they do every day. And so it's really important to pay attention to the personas and to the people that they say that they're focusing on in their marketing work, because those are the people that are actually using your tool or they're using your product. So, a lot of our clients are e-commerce. So we know that when we write the documentation, we want to have the e-commerce user in mind. So kind of put yourself in their shoes. Like if I was working in e-commerce, what kind of documentation would I want to see? Another issue, or not issue, I guess, yeah, is that because we're a semi-technical tool, our levels of understanding range from, just set up and go. And then we also have more advanced setup where you can get JavaScript involved. And so we also have to kind of sit back and say, okay, what this particular document I'm working on, is it the person who is just signing into our tool and using it right away? Or is it the person that's going to be setting up all those advanced features for that person? And so we try to make it as clear as possible once you start reading the document of, this is an advanced document. This is advanced setup. If you need a particular feature set up, reach out to your web developer and show them this document so that the worst thing that can happen, and it's not even the level of understanding. I know for me personally, if I'm reading something and I can't understand it, I'm going to get upset because my first thoughts are, why can't I understand it? Is there something wrong with me? Why is this difficult? And so it's really important to let it be known up front that no, it's totally fine that you don't understand this document if you are not a web developer, or it's totally fine if you are a beginner, you don't understand this document, so that there's no negative feeling as you're trying to read through that documentation.
Fantastic. So that's great. So I think you put the customers first, and you really want to see how customers would receive your documentation. So I'm sure this next question is going to be very easy for you to answer too. So what role does documentation have in your customer success or service strategies?
Yeah, so that's pretty pretty fluid actually. We want to have self-service as much as possible for the user, and it's not, sometimes self-service is kind of focused for like, oh, let's reduce ticket numbers so that we're reducing ticket numbers, but that's not really our 100. That's not our aim. I mean, obviously it's great to have lower ticket numbers, but that's not really what 100% we're aiming for. We want self-service to be increased because we want those answers to be answered right away. You want the user to be able to keep going and keep using the product and keep getting the insights that they want to get without having to wait for a reply or wait for help. So whenever we create the documentation, it's highly linked within our support tickets. So support are really on board with writing replies to the user and also explaining how to fix their problem, but then also attaching documentation. And so what that does is, you have the support agent explaining it. Then you also have the user being able to rely on a step-by-step guide or whatever the documentation is to complete the task. And then they also have that tool for next time. So it's kind of like their secret weapon for next time whenever they're about to try to do something new on our tool, or they're wanting to gain more insights in a different section or use a poll rather than a heat map or different aspects of our tool. They say, oh, you know what, last time they sent me to the knowledge base and they sent me this document, and maybe I can search there, or maybe I can see if there's a guide to use a different aspect of the tool. And with that, that's already setting them up for success without having to wait for any additional help, and feel like that it, have that positive feeling. You want them to have that positive feeling throughout the entire process of using the tool.
Fantastic. Great.
Yeah.
So you did already mention that reducing the number of support tickets may not be one of your factors to consider quality documentation. So how do you normally measure the reduction in workload once you introduced a quality documentation?
So I guess, are you talking about like stats or?
Yeah. So how do you, or what kind of reduction in workload have you seen since introducing a quality documentation?
Yeah. So what we as a team found that looking over the documentation that was already there when we first started, or when I personally first started, there was a lot of content that was repeats, duplicate paragraphs and other that and like repeating documents that just seemed that there was too much there to search through. And so we did an audit on the knowledge base and just reduced a lot. I think we archived about 100 and something documents, and then just really improved what was there and made sure that it was structured, that if anything was reused or we did repeat information on one or two documents, that it's it's linked so that it's noticeable, and essentially trying to get to that structure of reusing content, and structured authoring. And with that, it's helped us with creating new documentation and updating our documentation immensely. Like, I can't even explain it to you. Like, we had a backlog call yesterday where we kind of groomed the backlog in Jira of any requests we have for documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen our backlog so thin in my entire life. Like, it's just and being able to, trying to get out the rubbish, get out the trash, get out the rubbish from the what's currently there. And it does take a while to go through the entire knowledge base, and it does take a lot of effort and manpower to go through each document and see if it's necessary, looking at the Google Analytics of it, looking at how many people are interacting with it, seeing if any tickets are coming from that particular document, and saying, okay, we need this, we don't need this. But being able to have that structure and making sure that you're as lean as possible just improves any new work that you have to put on the table. And that backlog kind of proves it to me. Like, yesterday, usually we have about 45 minutes for that backlog call, and we were done in like 10 minutes. We're like, well, this is weird. So I'll talk to you guys later. It was a really quick call because that backlog is just getting prettier and prettier, honestly.
Very nice to hear, Karissa. So super. So I think you have answered quite a lot about how you go about creating your documentation and different processes involved in making sure it's of high standards. So is there any other way you measure the quality of your documentation?
Yes, we do use quite a few different stats to kind of monitor what's happening with the user. I know self-service score is a very common thread when it comes to help centers, and I see the positives in it, and I do keep track of it, but I also kind of see the negatives as well, because there's a lot of outlying factors that contribute to self-service score, right? So if anyone's not familiar, self-service score is the number of tickets opened by, or sent to the support team by a unique user, divided by the unique visitors to your knowledge base. Or sorry, the other way around. The unique visitors to your knowledge base divided by the unique number of tickets sent by an end user.
Mm-hmm.
And which is great. It's a great stat to monitor to see how many people are able to use your self-service documents because they're not reaching out with tickets. But if you just look at that example, there's other factors that might contribute to that. So, you might have a really low number of people submitting tickets, but maybe they're having a hard time finding how to submit a ticket from your knowledge base. Or maybe your documentation isn't clear enough, so they are, bouncing. They're like, yeah, nope, I'm done. I can't figure out this answer, so I give up.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a really great self-service score, but it may also be that it's just because people are giving up. So I keep track of it, but I also look at the other stats. So like, I'll look at Google Analytics for bounce rate. So are people just landing and leaving? The amount of time spent on a page. I really want to make sure that dense documents, the ones with videos, or FAQ pages, that they're there for a while. If they're there for under a minute or so, that's kind of a red flag for me, saying, okay, why were they there under a minute if it's an FAQ or video dense page? Are they not interacting with the videos? Are they not finding the information they need? Another one that we rely on is page views versus tickets over time. So it would just be page views of the knowledge base in total. And we compare it to, that's over months. So right now, I think it's over a 10-month period we have it set up. And we compare that to the number of tickets opened within that 10-month period. And what we do is we monitor the correlation. So obviously, if we have an increase, if we have an increase in page views of the knowledge base, a positive correlation, we want to see or a positive slope. We want to see a negative slope when it comes to the number of tickets open. Because if more people are viewing our knowledge base, we want there to be a less number of tickets because we're solving those questions before they even have a chance to ask them. And then the biggest one that we rely on isn't necessarily numeral based. It's our incoming feedback widget. It's one of the tools that we have within Hotjar. And it's a little smiley face guy that lives on the side of our documentation, and the user will click on it, and it's an emoji scale from hate to love, and people can give back their feedback for that particular document. So if something's unclear or something's missing, they can say, "Oh, I hate this," and they'll say, "You didn't tell me X, Y, and Z." And so those will come directly to us, and we can say, "Oh, you know what? We are missing, X, Y, and Z," and we can go to that documentation, add those elements that user said was missing, and really work quickly off the feedback that we're getting from the documentation. And so you can kind of measure the health of a page by if it started out with getting some negative feedback saying it needs to be improved, then over time you kind of see it being happy faces and positive comments and compliments like, "Oh, this is really clear, thank you." And so we use that as a guide. And I guess the last one, we are in Zendesk for our knowledge base, and they have a voting system at the bottom of the page saying, was this article useful, thumbs up, thumbs down. And when we make changes to documentation, we'll kind of take note of what the current, and we call it an acceptance rating, what the current one is. And then as we make changes to the documentation, if it's a big change, we'll kind of monitor it for the next few weeks to see how the acceptance rating changes. And we hope to see a positive change. So we hope to see that more people start giving us thumbs up for that particular page.
Super. Very, very nice to hear this, Karissa. So I'm sure you might be doing this. Any organic search traffic from your knowledge base you're currently generating?
Yeah, actually. And it's interesting because we knew for a while that a lot of our search, or a good portion of our search, or incoming traffic, was organic searching. And marketing had reached out to us because when we were doing the documentation audit, we were archiving a bunch of documents because their page views were maybe 6 page views over the past 6 months, something silly like that. Mm-hmm. And marketing were just like, so you removed, this document, and that was a huge number one when people searched for this term. Can you put it back? And we were like, oh, of course, so it was really, that was kind of the moment where we were thinking, okay, maybe we really should pay attention to organic traffic, especially with search terms. And so we asked the marketing department to give us access to Google Search Console, which looks at number of clicks and impressions based on keywords that people are searching within Google, to make sure that, to see how much power each of the documents actually have within Google. And since we've done that, it's really nice because you can see the top search terms that are relating to Hotjar and get an idea of, okay, maybe our documentation for example, one of our highest search terms is Hotjar API. So maybe our documentation over API isn't as strong as we think it is, since, a lot of people are searching for that, or not even as strong as we think it is, that maybe we should go and make sure that it isn't weak, since a lot of people are searching for that, and we want to make sure that they're finding the information they need. But yeah, that Google Search Console, or actually asking your marketing team to help with organic traffic, is is fairly essential to make sure that you're getting all those stats to really help focus your documentation.
Super, super. So let's finish off with our rapid fire round. So who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
Other documentation managers. When I started each year, or I guess each year, the past 2 years, at the beginning of the year, I've been doing interviews with other documentarians in the community from Slack, from Support Driven, from Write the Docs. And I'm doing about 10 a year and doing one-on-one interviews with them and asking them, their structure, what their workflow looks like, any tips and tricks they have, what tools they use. And just, it's funny because a lot of people will think like, oh, I'm really not that interesting. I'm sure you've heard of all before. But every single interview I've done so far, I've learned something completely off base that I never even thought of in my mind. So definitely reaching out to other people in the community is essential, and don't be afraid because people will help you 100% of the time.
Great. So can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed recently?
Ooh, yeah. I like reading different books, not necessarily about knowledge-based management, because I think it's really important to pay attention to like UX, content creation, because it all kind of plays into the Help Center. And then the one that I recently read was Designing Connected Content, and it's by Carrie Hain and Mike Atherton. And the main goal of the book is to help with content creation. And it's typically aimed towards marketers that are creating like blog posts or copy for web pages. But I would say about 85% of it pertains to Help Center and knowledge-based management. And so it's really helpful with trying to define a structure of how your knowledge base is set up and how content is created for that knowledge base. And I've already started like implementing a bunch of the stuff mentioned in that book for our knowledge base. Yeah.
Very nice. So what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Ask for help. It's not bad if you don't know something. You kind of go into positions that you're new, or kind of with that stigma of, if I ask for help, I look weak. And that's the complete opposite. If you ask for help, you're not being weak. You're actually showing, hey, I'm comfortable in the fact that I don't know something, and I want to make sure that I know it and I can keep growing. So I'm going to ask you this question. And like I said, like it's just, especially with the interviews I've been doing, or I do each year with other documentations, like if someone says something that I don't understand, I immediately ask, this might sound dumb, but I don't know what that is. Can you please explain it to me? And it just helps you grow and grow and grow and grow, rather than, secretly Googling things because you don't know what they are. It's just really important. And I definitely would kind of beat that into my brain that it's okay to ask questions and you need to ask for help.
Fantastic, Karissa. So I would like to quickly summarize or highlight some of the points that you shared with us today in this podcast. The way you took over the responsibility of owning the documentation for Hotjar is really high on your quality. You just took the opportunity when there were no ownership. And the most stunning point that you shared today was the listening to your customers. You voice of the customers, you share with other team members to create your documentation. And of course, every documentation goes through a vigorous process, from what I understood from the conversation you did with us now, and the way you analyze the documents visited by your customers, again with the wholehearted willingness to improve the way the content is being published to help your customers. So these are some of the points that I would like to highlight in the podcast. Are there any other points you want to share with us today, Karissa?
No, that's about it. Again, if I sound like I repeat this constantly, but definitely reach out to the community, reach out. There's a great Slack. If anyone's not familiar, Write the Docs. They have conferences in the States, Australia, and Europe each year. That's a great resource to keep your learning up to date and know all trends that are coming up within the Help Center and knowledge base area. And even support driven, even if you're not in support or based in support, is really great because they have a really great perspective of knowledge-based management with the customer in mind and keeping them front and center.
Very nice. Thank you. So once again, I appreciate your time spent with us today for this Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. And it was a great pleasure having you today. And I hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you, Karissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.